Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that really tries to cut through the noise and get you those insights you need to be genuinely well-informed. Today, we're tackling something that, honestly, it affects every single field of science. H how does knowledge, the cutting-edge stuff, actually travel from the researchers to the people who could, well, use it? It's often not a straight line. It can be messy. Miscommunications, sometimes just flat-out rejection. And our focus today is specifically on management research. We're diving into this idea of evidence-based management, EBM. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We're looking at a really interesting paper by David E. Guest from 2007 called Don't Shoot the Messenger, a wake-up call for academics. And what it does is it responds to some pretty big claims made earlier by Rynes, Gillick, and Brown about this whole knowledge transfer thing. But crucially, it brings in a European, specifically a UK viewpoint.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating, I think, is how much we just sort of assume about how knowledge gets from A to B, from the lab bench or the academic journal to the manager's actual decisions, and how often reality just doesn't match that assumption. So our mission for this deep dive, really, is to understand the real hurdles, the often invisible ones, why those magazines or journals written for practitioners might not be doing what we think they should be doing, and maybe most importantly, what do managers actually want from research? What do they need? It's a surprisingly complex picture, and Guest gives us a really candid look, almost raw, actually.
Okay, so let's start with Guest starts. He's responding to that Rynes, Gillick, and Brown study. What were they arguing? What was the problem they saw?
Well, they laid out three main claims, kind of setting the stage for why there's this research practice gap, as it's often called. Their first point was that academic experts, they pretty much agree on what works, specific management practices that have benefits, even when, and this is a key part, even when the practitioners themselves might have what Rynes and colleagues called muddled or incorrect beliefs. They even listed like the 5 most fundamental findings from HR research that they felt every manager should know. Things like, how important general intelligence is for job performance, the big 5 personality traits, goal setting, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so claim 1. Academics know what's what, even if managers don't. There's a consensus.
That was the foundation.
Yeah.
And claim 2 followed naturally.
Right.
Those intermediary publications, the HR magazines, the trade journals, their job should be to communicate this agreed upon knowledge. Communicate it well, with the right amount of detail, accurately reflecting the evidence.
And then claim 3. That was the kicker, wasn't it? Pretty direct.
Oh, yeah. Very blunt. They basically said, look, the evidence shows that in the U.S., these publications are failing on both counts. They weren't publishing enough of this core stuff, and what they did publish often didn't really line up with the academic consensus. A major breakdown in the pipeline, basically.
Right. And connecting this to the bigger picture, this is all happening under the umbrella of evidence-based management, isn't it? The push to make management more scientific, more data-driven.
Exactly. It fits right into that EBM movement. But the Rynes paper didn't exactly paint a rosy picture for EBM's success if these communication lines were so fundamentally broken. The idea of EBM sounds great, the desire for evidence is arguably there, but the mechanics of getting it to people, well, that seemed to be where the problem lay, according to them.
Okay, so that's the U.S. picture painted by Rynes and colleagues. Pretty stark. But, as you said, Guest brings in the UK perspective. Does it just mirror the U.S., or does it get, well, even more complicated?
It gets more complicated, definitely. Guest found some direct UK equivalents to the U.S. publications, like people management being similar to HR Magazine. But when he actually checked articles in the UK's Human Resource Management Journal, talked to the people management editorial team, he found something interesting on topics like goal setting and psychometric testing, personality tests, aptitude tests used in hiring the UK performance, judged by Rynes et al.'s own criteria, seemed even worse, like almost nothing on goal setting. And for testing, mostly just case studies, not the underlying research evidence.
Wow, even worse. But then the editors, the messengers themselves, they had their own take, didn't they? They didn't just say, oops, our bad.
Not at all. They basically pushed back. They said, look, it's not our central role to just report established academic findings. That's not what we see ourselves doing.
Yeah.
They see themselves more like a news magazine, providing information, news, updates relevant to readers right now. They mentioned things like legal updates being really popular and case study stories about real organizations tackling real problems or innovating. Their focus is different.
And didn't Guest mention something quite telling about what readers actually look at first in that magazine?
He did. It's quite a detail. Apparently, their surveys showed about 1/3 of the readers turn first to the job ads.
That says a lot, doesn't it? About priorities and why people pick up the magazine.
It really does. And the editors argued, look, thinking of the print magazine as the main way to communicate scientific evidence. That's kind of outdated. They see themselves increasingly as a web-based operation. People go online for timely info, like on psychometric testing, using their website, or the Professional Bodies Advisory Service. It's about instant access, not the monthly print cycle.
So the channels themselves are shifting, and maybe our expectations haven't caught up. But wait, in the UK, wasn't there this big government push for evidence-based policy and practice starting way back in '99? Lots of initiatives, funding.
Yes, absolutely. On the surface, it looks like fertile ground for EBM. The government was explicitly endorsing it, particularly in medicine, but extending the idea elsewhere. ESRC research centers, university knowledge transfer funding, lots of infrastructure.
Sounds promising.
But, and this is a big but, the idea of EBM itself is actually more debated, more contested in the UK and Europe compared to the US. There's a very strong critical management tradition in UK academia. It doesn't just take management knowledge at face value. It has questions about power, about whose interests are being served. They might question whether academics should be championing practices that could be seen as going against worker interests, for instance. And this view is reinforced by strong trade unions. So it adds this whole other layer of complexity. It's not just if the evidence exists, but also whose evidence and for what purpose.
That's a really key difference. So it's not just about efficiently transmitting findings. There's an underlying debate about the nature and implications of those findings.
Precisely. It means that even if academics did agree on something, getting it adopted isn't just about convincing managers it works. It's also navigating this deeper discourse about values, ethics, and stakeholder impact. Makes EBM a much thornier issue.
Okay, fascinating context. Let's go back to Guest challenging those original Rynes claims. He really drilled down on this idea of academic consensus, didn't he?
He did. He basically said, hang on, this consensus you're talking about, maybe it's not as solid as you think. A flawed consensus, he called it. Remember, Rynes et al. Surveyed 85 editorial board members about the top 5 HR findings. Guest points out that only 5 topics even got mentioned more than 10 times, and the top 3 only got about 20 mentions each out of 85 experts.
So not exactly overwhelming agreement.
Not at all. Guest's conclusion was pretty sharp. This does not imply an academic consensus.
Yeah.
He basically says, if most of your experts didn't list these topics in their top 5, we are far away from a consensus that we can communicate with confidence.
That really changes things, doesn't it? If the experts themselves don't have a unified message, how can you blame practitioners or magazines for not picking up on it? It's like, what message are they supposed to pick up?
Exactly. It shifts the focus back to academia itself. Maybe the problem isn't just the transmission. Maybe it's the signal itself that isn't clear or strong enough.
And Guest also brought up this timing issue, the new versus established problem.
Yeah, this is a great point. He argues that for a lot of these findings, establishing the evidence takes years. Rigorous research, replication, peer review. It's a slow process. By the time academics are really truly confident, the finding isn't new anymore. It's not newsworthy for publications that thrive on the latest thing, the next trend.
So there's this built-in lag. Academic certainty arrives just as practitioner interest, or at least media interest, might be waning because it feels like old news.
Precisely. Academic rigor moves at one speed, the practitioner market and media cycle move at another.
And he also pointed out, didn't he, that some of these practices, like psychometric testing, were actually already being used quite a bit in the UK.
Right. He cited a big 2004 survey showing nearly half of UK workplaces used performance tests. Almost 20% used personality tests. His argument was that the growth wasn't necessarily because of recent academic communication efforts. It was more down to HR professionals getting more sophisticated, maybe regulatory pressures, industry norms shifting, other factors.
So the practice was spreading, just maybe not through the channels Rynes et al. Were focusing on. Practitioners weren't necessarily ignorant of these things.
Yeah, it suggests adoption happens through multiple roads. Peer networks, consultants, professional bodies, maybe even just osmosis within an industry. The academic paper might validate it later, but isn't always the spark.
Okay, so we've got questions about the consensus, issues with the messengers, and maybe a misunderstanding of how practitioners actually learn and adopt things. Which brings us to the core question. What do managers want? If it's not just dry academic findings, what are they looking for?
And this is where Guest really flips the script, focusing on the user, the receiver. He points out that despite all the efforts to push high-performance HR, adoption was often, well, kind of modest. So why? His own research with King, talking to senior UK managers, gave some clues.
What did they find? Were managers just unaware?
Mostly, no.
Yeah.
They were aware of the evidence, but they often hadn't acted on it recently. And the reasons were really pragmatic. Some said, yeah, we already do that. Others were skeptical, is this just another HR fad? Then there were the usual suspects. We have bigger fish to fry right now, other priorities, and of course, no budget for it.
So familiar organizational realities, it's not always about not knowing, it's about relevance, priority, resources.
Exactly. And here's the real kicker from that study. What managers really wanted was local evidence, proof it worked for other organizations like theirs in their own sector.
Ah, so not just the science says, but what did that competitor down the road do, and did it work for them?
Precisely. Bankers wanted to know what other banks were doing. Retailers wanted retail examples. It's this idea of isomorphism. Companies copy successful peers in their field. They want context-specific proof, their main sources. Other managers, sometimes academics, used as sounding boards, maybe Harvard Business Review, but a lot of it was just gut feeling, judgment based on implicit knowledge.
So distilling that, Guest identified three main things managers are actually seeking. First,
hmm
help solving current pressing problems, like right now.
Yeah, timeliness is huge. Print is too slow. The web helps. If academics can't offer a timely angle, consultants definitely will step in. Got to address the immediate pain points.
Second, they want ways of looking, which sounds like fresh insights, right?
Yeah,
Maybe repackaging old ideas.
exactly. Taking established stuff but framing it differently, using engaging language. Think talent management or employee engagement. These aren't brand new concepts necessarily, but the framing makes them feel fresh and relevant. It connects.
Makes sense. And the third thing, this one's interesting, emotional appeal.
Right. Information that validates their work, offers hope, maybe even salvation for tough problems.
Mhm.
HR is a challenging field, and this is where guest notes, management gurus, often win out. Think the one-minute manager. Academics might scoff at the lack of rigor, but
The gurus connect.
yeah. Guest says their novelty, emotional appeal, perceived relevance, and promises of payoffs have helped to communicate to a wide audience. They tap into that emotional need for answers, for reassurance, for impact. It's something academics trained for objectivity often struggle with. Which brings us back to needing to see EBM from a user perspective. Academics need to listen more, understand practitioners' real needs and pressures. Guest even makes the point that academics themselves don't always use these best practices when they manage things, often for perfectly good reasons. Which complicates the whole idea, doesn't it?
It really does. If the experts don't always apply it universally, it underscores that context matters hugely. Okay, so given all this complexity, the shaky consensus, the evolving media, the critical perspective, what managers really want, what's the way forward? How do we bridge this gap better?
Guest offers some clear steps. First, critically assess the consensus. Be honest about how much agreement there really is before claiming something is important and established. Don't oversell the certainty.
Makes sense. Be more humble about the knowledge claims. What else?
Second, be realistic about those intermediary publications. Understand their constraints, their audience demands. They have a different job to do than academic journals. Don't expect them to be something they're not.
I manage expectations about the messengers.
Third, fully embrace multiple electronic channels, the web, virtual platforms. They offer the timeliness and accessibility practitioners need. Move beyond just print.
Get the information to where people are looking, when they're looking.
And fourth, and maybe most importantly, focus on the receiver. Academics need to think much more about practitioner needs, interests, language, problems. Start from their world, not just the world of research findings.
Build that bridge starting from the user side.
Exactly, and others have built on this. Anderson talked about actively building bridges. Things like academics joining government commissions, getting involved with consultants, creating joint forums where academics and practitioners actually talk to each other regularly.
More active engagement, not just publishing into the void.
Right, and Rousseau and McCarthy suggested focusing on developing learned resourcefulness in practitioners. So instead of just pushing messages at them, equip them with the skills to find, evaluate, and apply evidence themselves. Teach them how to ask critical questions, how to diagnose problems properly, where to look for credible information. Empower the user.
So the takeaway isn't shoot the messenger. It's more like stop just shouting messages and start equipping the receiver to better navigate the information landscape.
That's a great way to put it. Empower the receiver. And always remember, as Guest reminds us, evidence in the social sciences is always likely to be contested. It's rarely black and white. So maybe the goal shouldn't be a rigid evidence-based practice, but something more like evidence-informed practice, using evidence as one crucial input alongside experience, context, values.
It paints a much richer, more complex picture, doesn't it? Why getting research into practice is so hard. It's tangled up with academic culture, media evolution, practitioner needs, even fundamental debates about knowledge itself.
Absolutely. This deep dive really underscores that just having the evidence is only the first tiny step. How that evidence gets filtered, translated, valued, debated, and ultimately used or not used is a whole other, much more complicated journey. Being well-informed here means understanding all those twists and turns.
Which leaves us with a thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about your own work, your own professional life. When you face a problem or look for a new approach, how much do you rely on that local evidence, what your peers are doing? Or maybe that emotional appeal from an expert or a compelling story? How does that weigh against digging into the established academic consensus? What does being evidence informed truly look like for you in practice?